Brighton signed Ibrahim Osman for £18 million 18 months ago, and now he's on loan to Auxerre with an option to buy. What's going on? Osman started at the Right to Dream Academy, and then he was a breakthrough at FC Nordsjaelland, like usual with those two clubs. Then he signed for Brighton in February 2024 for £18 million. They beat West Ham United to his signature. Then he spent a season on loan at Feyenoord, and now he's gone to Auxerre with a £13 million option to buy. So Osman is a winger. He can play on both sides, he's direct, and he's explosive. And compared to other players in similar positions in similar leagues and competitions over the last year, he's in the 94th percentile for progressive carries, 5.13 per 90, very impressive. At the 88th percentile for successful take-ons, 2.28 per 90, and the 98th percentile for touches in the penalty area, 6.38 per 90. And if you look at his heat map, you can see how wide he likes to stay, how direct he likes to be, how high he likes to stay, and how much he likes to get forwards. But it also shows he can spread himself around the pitch as well and attack in different ways. And stylistic comparisons, he shares some traits with LAFC's Dennis Bouanga, Coventry's Mason Clark, Feyenoord's Igor Paxal, who was his teammate, and Sassuolo's Loriente, who has just been linked with a move to Sunderland. And that is a deal that could be done very soon. And maybe it's a slight surprise that someone like a Sunderland didn't come and make a loan bid for Osman, or maybe a Leeds. But his key strengths are his acceleration, his flair, and his unpredictability, which leads to him creating an average of 3.76 shot creating actions per 90, which for a winger is where he probably should be about there. Still very good stats. His weaknesses though, his end product, his physicality and his decision making. So 2.91 shots per 90 on average, with just 0.89 on target per 90. So only about 30% of his shots are on target, which is not the best end product. It's not the worst for a winger, but it's certainly not the best we've ever seen. And then he completed just 33.9% of his take-ons and was tackled 31 times. So 52.5% of the time he was tackled during the take-on. So that decision making isn't quite there, still very raw. Needs to learn a bit better when to pass, when to take on, when to dribble, when to shoot, when to cross, things like that. But still, not the worst stats you've ever seen for a winger, especially one who's still very, very young and has only had one season at a relatively decent level in the Eredivisie, not yet played in a top 5 league, but he is about to with Auxerre, so that'll be very interesting to see how that goes. But why did Brighton sign him if they're just going to ship him out already and not even give him a chance? Well, look at the context. He's a classic Brighton signing from Nordsjaelland / the Right to Dream pipeline, like Kudus to West Ham, Sulemana to Southampton, and of course Simon Adingra to Brighton as well. Those sorts of players always are linked to these sort of mid-table clubs pushing for Europe that like to develop younger players and take a risk. He has a high ceiling, he has a resale potential, well, somewhat has a resale potential, and he fits Brighton's model of buying cheap, selling for higher. That doesn't seem to have worked out quite yet, but it's still very short term. He's only been at the club for about 18 months and hasn't had a chance. And he was possibly seen as a future Matoma successor, and that could still be the case, which we'll come on to a minute with Auxerre and the money. But why was he loaned and now it looks like he's going to be let go? Well, the Feyenoord loan, he played very limited minutes, 1,310 to be precise, across 32 games. And he underperformed really with only 7 goals/assists, and fans really disliked him. There's been a lot of talk on social media from Feyenoord fans, journalists, saying he wasn't the best. He was probably one of the poorer players they've seen play for Feyenoord, so that doesn't really bode well when you're coming back and wanting to play in a Premier League squad. He had competition from Auxerre as well, who funnily enough has been linked with Brighton and also Leeds, so that would have also impacted his minutes. But his lack of impact, Brighton have likely reassessed his development pathway and maybe think that he's not going to be good enough. But it's, as I say, it's very, very short term. So can you ship a player out the door? He had limited minutes in pre-season last year. He didn't play much for Feyenoord. Surely you have to give him another year, which I think the loan is meant to do that, but the option to buy, as I say, puts a bit of doubt into that. But the loan to Auxerre with the option to buy suggests that Brighton are open to a clean break. The option to buy at just £13 million would be a potential loss. Or is it a calculated risk, as Brighton have realised he needs regular senior minutes, and Auxerre offer that as a mid-table Ligue club? But when I say calculated risk, Auxerre's record transfer fee is just under £5 million back in the 2005-2006 season. So can they really afford £13 million next year, no matter how good he is? Of course, there is always the possibility they do what Nuremberg and Brighton did with the transfer of Stefano Simas. Nuremberg couldn't afford Simas's £20 million buy option from PAOK, but Brighton said, activate that, we'll pay you straight away for just over, I think it's about £25 million. So that could be something we see happen with Osman. But even so, if, let's say, he does go on a permanent, Brighton are likely to have a percentage, maybe even a buyback. Very unlikely to have a buyback, but definitely a percentage. So they still probably make profit in the end. What does this say about Brighton's model? Well, as everyone knows by now, Brighton are a data-first model and they're unafraid to cut their losses early. Not every signing has to make it at the Amex, and some are just portfolio bets, like Kjell Sherpen, who's been on loan in Austria and is moving on permanently this summer. Dennis Sundav really underperformed in the Premier League. Maybe wasn't given the fairest chance, but still underperformed. And Valentin Barco, to an extent, didn't do very well in Spain. Again, wasn't given the best chance. Played pretty well for Brighton and then loaned straight out to Strasbourg with a 10 million obligation to buy. So sometimes Brighton just cut their losses and the losses aren't too big and they move on. This could be, very unlikely to be, could be the case with Ibrahim Osman. My final thoughts to wrap it up. Osman is still only young. This is definitely not the end of his story. Brighton are ruthless in their decisions and their model, but they're efficient. And Auxerre is the best place for Osman to be on loan. One, because he will get regular minutes in a very competitive league, and the option to buy is likely to be too high for them, and we could see him return next season as a Matoma replacement. And if he built that momentum, it wouldn't be a surprise to see him thrive in the blue and white stripes for the Seagulls. But that is it in this video. Hope you enjoyed this new type of content that I'm trying to put together, more data-led stats, things like that. But don't forget to like, subscribe, comment your thoughts on Osman. Is he going to succeed at Auxerre and Brighton? Will Auxerre pay his option to buy? Let me know. And you know the outro by now. Adios!